Hey Optimancers, Chris here. I'll be getting back to Playtest 7 soon, but first, they decided to release the first Dungeon Master's Guide playtest early, and we have now seen the Bastion system, which I'll cover in a later video, but they also decided to throw in some cantrip redesign. Spell redesign in the playtest is like fresh brewed morning coffee. That moment where the alarm goes off and you wake up and you just wish you could stay in bed, but then you think, if I get up, I can brew some coffee. Dear audience, it's not unlike being subscribed to Tree and Monk's Temple. That sweet aroma of that satisfying new video in your subscription feed, nothing quite like it. Or even better, being a patron. Link in the description to my Patreon. Early access to videos where the ads are turned off. That's like that first sip in the morning. You just can't describe it. You have to experience it for yourself. So naturally, I'm interrupting my Playtest 7 content to pour through the new cantrip design. Here's the plan. With each cantrip, I'm going to start by going over the mechanics, then I'll list out every change from the current version, I'll theorize why the changes were made, and then I'll finish up with my overall opinion. And I have to start out of order with Shocking Grasp, because this one hits me hard. So this cantrip is available to sorcerers and wizards, and artificers too. I haven't forgotten you, artificer. 1 action to cast, and you make a melee spell attack against a target. If you hit, they take a d8 lightning damage and can't make opportunity attacks until the start of their next turn. As a standard cantrip scaling, the damage increases to 2d8 when you reach level 5, 3d8 at level 11, and finally 4d8 at level 17. So there are 2 changes from the 2014 Player's Handbook version here. The first is you no longer get advantage on the attack roll if the target is wearing metal armor, and secondly, the only reaction prevented are opportunity attacks. The old version prevented all reactions. So, why the changes? Well, according to the design notes, shutting down all reactions is too powerful for a cantrip, and removing the advantage against metal armor wearing targets puts it more in line with the design of other lightning spells. And I don't doubt these reasons, but I don't think they tell the whole story. With the metal armor thing, I also think there's the ease of play that's a factor. It removes the question because it's not always going to be clear to a player what kind of armor their opponent is wearing, but it also removes inconsistencies. Like if metal somehow makes it easier to hit, then why not advantage on retrievers? Or even more vague, what about animated armor? Technically, animated armor isn't wearing armor, so it doesn't qualify and it doesn't make sense. So I imagine that's why that change. But why aren't reactions being blocked anymore? How's that too powerful? I mean, we've been playing with Shocking Grasp since 2014, and I have heard 0 complaints that Shocking Grasp is OP. So why now? Okay, so here's why it's heartbreaking for me, because I know the answer, and this isn't a joke. I literally planned a video and wrote a script to explain how Shocking Grasp was becoming an overpowered spell because of its ability to remove reactions. The day before Playtest 8 was released. Now to be clear, this script was likely to see some edits before I recorded it, but the title was going to be something like The New Must-Have Spell in D&D at High Levels, Shocking Grasp. And here's the rundown of how the video would have gone. I would explain how when the Vecna stat block was released in 2022, we were confused to see it have no legendary actions, but have multiple reactions instead. What if I told you that the last officially released monster stat block with legendary actions was friggin' Spelljammer? Because that's when it was. Now what high challenge monsters get is extra reactions. We saw a lot of them in the recent Planescape release. Now, think of all the monsters in the monster manual with legendary resistances. Well, they're printing a new monster manual next year. Imagine all those monsters with extra reactions instead. Imagine as an optimizer. You wonder how you could take advantage of this redesign. So you start looking for every way to shut down reactions without a saving throw, because legendary resistance is still a thing. In fact, giving monsters more than 3 legendary resistances is also a part of current monster design. So you search for the ways to shut down reactions without a saving throw, and what you find is exactly 2 ways to do it. And one of those 2 has already been redesigned in the playtest to now provide a saving throw. And the other one is a one-action cantrip. What do? Well, you write a script for a video and share this revelation with the community on friggin' Wednesday, October 4th, one day before the release of Playtest 8. That's what you do. So yeah, I know exactly why Shocking Grasp only affects opportunity attacks now. So, my opinion. I get the reasons for the changes, but then make it a D10. The changes here are both objective nerfs to the spell. I think they should have increased the damage to compensate. Okay, one more cantrip I'm covering out of order. Produce Flame. So, you use a bonus action to cast a spell which lasts for 10 minutes. During that time, a flickering flame from your hand sheds 20 feet of bright light and 20 feet of dim light, and you can use a magic action to make a ranged spell attack at a creature or object within 60 feet of you, doing a d8 fire damage with a standard scaling 2d8 at level 5, 3d8 at level 11, and 4d8 at level 17. So there are quite a few changes here. The old version used an action to cast, and then you would attack with it once when you cast a spell or as an action afterwards. You couldn't target objects. The light was 10 feet of bright and 10 feet of dim, and when you made the attack, the spell ended. So, why did they change it? Well, the design notes say what the changes are, but they don't say the reason for the changes. That happens with a number of these cantrips. Here's the reason. Produce Flame sucks. It sucks so much that when I made a video about weak spells just very recently, Produce Flame was one of only 2 cantrips that I featured. I noted 3 issues with the cantrip. That its range was worse than all other ranged cantrips, that the 20 feet of light was way too little, and that the spell ended when you attack, leaving you back in the dark, so you don't even get that. And here's the fix I recommended. I recommended increasing the range to 60 feet, the light to 30 feet of bright and 30 feet of dim, and for the spell not to end if you attack. So I couldn't help but notice their redesign and my suggested redesign were very similar. The main difference is I suggested tripling the light range and they only doubled it. So obviously I'm pretty happy with this, though I still think making the light 30 and 30 would be better. I mean, if you can target something 60 feet away from you, it'd be nice for it to be illuminated by the spell. But this does address every issue I had with the spell. And I should mention that allowing it to target objects, a detail a lot of players normally don't consider, is a buff I didn't even recommend, but it is nice to see. Okay, I'm going to cover the rest of the cantrips in order from beginning to end. So we have Acid Splash, which is an action to cast, and you target a point within 60 feet and it explodes in a 5-foot radius sphere, which will be 4 squares on a 2-dimensional grid, and each creature in the sphere makes a dexterity saving throw or takes a d6 acid damage with standard scaling, 2d6 at level 5, 3d6 at level 11, and 4d6 at level 17. The 2014 version targets up to 2 creatures within range if they're within 5 feet of each other. And otherwise, they're the same except for a spell school change from Conjuration to Evocation, which is probably inconsequential. So, why the changes? Well, according to the design notes, the school change is to put the cantrip in line with other direct damage acid spells, and I see no reason to doubt that. As for the bigger change, I just think making it an area of effect is something that's just gonna feel better for the player. Mechanically, it's technically a boost because, at least in theory, you can target more than 2 creatures, though I expect in reality you'll find it doesn't come up very often. So I actually think it's a fairly minor buff to make the spell feel quite a bit better. Technically, there is a tiny range increase too, technically. Like if I target a point 60 feet away, I could technically hit a creature that's 65 feet away. So there is that as well. Again, small detail. So, my opinion, I like it. It is a very minor buff, but it feels good. And I'm all for feel-good changes that don't throw game balance out of whack, which I don't think this one does. Okay, Blade Ward. So this has bigger changes. The spell is a reaction which you take in response to a visible creature targeting you with a melee attack. And that attack has disadvantage, and that's it. The old version was an action to cast, and it gave you resistance against bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage from weapon attacks for 1 round. The design notes tell us what these changes are, but not why they made the changes. But I think the reason is fairly obvious. There's no reaction defense cantrips. So this gives spellcasters a reaction events option that doesn't use resources. My opinion? Well, I've seen some reactions online that think this is too powerful and is basically a reaction shield spell. I don't think so. It's against one attack, and that attack has to be a melee weapon attack. So it's pretty limiting in a way that shield definitely isn't. Now, Jeremy Crawford mentioned in the Playtest 8 video that Blade Ward would scale with your level, allowing it to work against attacks from greater ranges. And obviously, that's not here. So either he was thinking about Spare the Dying, which does get that kind of scaling, or maybe there's an alternate version of this cantrip they're playing around with that has that kind of scaling, but for one reason or another, it didn't end up in this document. Maybe it was a last-minute switch or something. If I was to guess, that's what happened. There was a version that increased range with level they planned to print, they record the video, and then at the last minute they decided not to print that version. Maybe they thought it was overtuned or something. The similarities between this and the first level Light Cleric's Warding Flare do make them comparable. The differences being that Warding Flare works against ranged attacks, but has limited uses. So, I'm okay with the spell and the power level. However, if this does end up sticking, then I sure hope we get some errata for the Earth Genasi, because their Merge with Stone feature provides the ability to cast Blade Ward with a bonus action. And obviously, that doesn't work with this version of Blade Ward. Unofficially, what you could do is either give the Earth Genasi the old version of the cantrip, or a feature that replicates the old version of the cantrip, but make it a bonus action. But we need an official patch. Okay, Chill Touch. So, one action to cast, you make a melee spell attack against a creature, and on a hit, it takes a d10 necrotic damage and can't regain hit points until the end of your next turn. And it has the standard cantrip scaling. So the old version of Chill Touch is notorious for being neither chilly nor touchy. Basically, this version, but a d8 necrotic damage with a 120 foot range. Then it had this interaction, if you use it against an undead target, where it would have disadvantage on attack rolls against you until the end of your next turn. So, why the changes? So, switching it to touch should be obvious. New players especially assume this is a touch spell because, of course they do, so this removes that confusion. The undead thing was often forgotten, and using a necrotic damage spell against undead means it's often going to be immune to the damage, so it's not a spell you would normally run to. So removing the undead interaction is a simplification of the cantrip that isn't removing anything that attracted players to this cantrip. And the damage increase? Well, if you're going to make a 120 foot range attack cantrip a touch spell, you better improve the damage. So here's my opinions. The D10 is appropriate for a touch spell. I mean, it could be a D12. I think that'd be fine too. But the no hit points regained rider is actually pretty powerful, and sometimes amazingly powerful. So the D10 is probably where I would have landed myself. Getting rid of the undead interaction is a big nothing burger. It's just a really easy way to make the spell more simple without taking anything away that most players who took Chill Touch were really attached to. As for making it a touch spell, well, I'm on record. A spell's name should not be misleading. I think this one will not be controversial. So if you call a spell Featherfall, it should have you fall like a feather. If you call a spell Death Ward, it should ward off death. And if you call a spell Find Traps, it should find traps. And if you call a spell Chill Touch, it should be a chilly touch. So I would support this being cold damage. Now I know we have another cold damage cantrip, and this is our only necrotic damage cantrip. So I get not doing that. But making it a touch spell is the big one. So I'm on board with this. Friends. So a one action 10 foot range spell using concentration lasting up to 1 minute. You cast a spell and one creature within range makes a wisdom saving throw or gains the charm condition for the duration. If you're fighting that creature, have cast a spell on it within the last 24 hours, or it turns out not to be a humanoid, it automatically makes a saving throw. The spell ends if the target takes damage, you make an attack roll, deal damage, or force anyone to make a saving throw. So the old version was quite different. There was no saving throw, and it could be used against any creature that wasn't hostile to you, and it gave you advantage on charisma checks directed at that creature, and when the spell ended, the creature would become hostile to you. So, why all these changes? I mean, obviously, because the Friends cantrip didn't make friends. It did the opposite of what the name suggested. The spell Friends turned a creature that was not hostile to you hostile towards you. It should have been called Enemies. Also, the advantage on all charisma checks towards the creature was weird. Like, I'm going to dispel magic on that creature with my sorcerer, and I'd cast Friends on them, so I get advantage on my dispel magic charisma check. That was totally an intentional interaction, I'm sure. So now it doesn't turn the creature hostile. It provides a saving throw, and it imposes the charm condition, which better fits the name of the cantrip. My opinions. I like where they're going with this, but it is still weird, in my opinion. Like, let's say I make buddies with some person using this spell, and then we're attacked before the spell ends. So, if I attack whoever attacked them, it ends the spell? That's odd. I've heard some buzz that this cantrip could be used to detect non-humanoid shapeshifters. Nah, I don't know. It says they automatically make the saving throw if they aren't a humanoid. So, wouldn't the DM just announce that they made their saving throw? Maybe not. I guess it depends how you play. But also, a lot of shapeshifters are a humanoid. A werewolf is a humanoid, for example. So even if you play at a table where the DM announces that the spell doesn't work because they aren't humanoid, that's still pretty niche. But you know what? It could come up. But here's the thing. You cast Friends, and if the applicable target fails a saving throw, you make friends with it for a minute, and at the end of the minute, it's not automatically hostile. And you know how I feel about spells doing what their name implies. So I am happy with the direction here. There's just some weird restrictions here that I think could be smoothed out. Poison Spray. So, one action to cast, you make a ranged spell attack against a creature within 30 feet, and on a hit it takes a d12 poison damage with the standard level 5, 11, and 17 scaling. The old version was Conjuration, not Necromancy. It wasn't a spell attack. It targeted one creature within 10 feet, and it made a Constitution saving throw or took the damage. So, why the changes? Well, I imagine they figure that a direct damage poison cantrip fits Necromancy more than Conjuration, and making it a 30-foot range spell attack instead of a 10-foot range Constitution saving throw was a necessary improvement to the spell. My opinion. So, I couldn't care less about the school change. And Poison Spray absolutely needed an improvement. So I am happy to see this. But honestly, this should be 60 feet. I mean, sure, it's a d12, which is more than Firebolt, but this is poison damage, and 60 feet would still be half the range of Firebolt. So, this is a nice buff, and I'll take it, but I kind of wish they'll take this further. I mean, they could even go 120 feet, and I think this would be fine. Okay, Shillelagh. So, this is a bonus action to cast, and the club or quarterstaff you're holding can use your spellcasting modifier for attacks and damage rolls, and the weapon's damage die becomes a d8 for a minute. If you choose, you can choose to do force damage instead of the weapon's normal damage type. And we have some scaling. The weapon damage becomes a d10 at level 5, a d12 at level 11, and 2d6 at level 17. So here are the changes from the 2014 version. That one made attacks magical instead of giving you the option to do force damage, and the damage didn't scale with your level. So why change it? Well, first off, every ability in the game that changes your weapon's damage to magical damage is being replaced. So that's no surprise. And force makes as much sense as anything else. The scaling damage, I'm guessing it's because they want more spells to scale. I'm really not sure. So, my opinion, I am fine with the damage type switching, and it is totally expected. It's the direction they're going. I'm hoping and somewhat expecting that resistances to non-magical weapon attacks are going to be phased out, but we'll see. I don't really get the scaling damage here. I realize other damaging cantrips scale damage, but attacking with a Shillelagh is not an action, it's a weapon attack. So it scales with extra attack already. Unless you take that away, the scaling damage stacks with that, which seems pretty unnecessary and probably too much. Also, the scaling is pretty wonky. Like, it scales from a d12 to a 2d6. That does not seem like natural scaling to me. So, this is the first, and it's going to be the only cantrip in this package I'm just flat not on board for. The force damage thing, sure, that's fine. But if you want to make Shillelagh better, then give us a better duration, like 10 minutes or even an hour. I don't think scaling the damage is a good idea, at least not without some limit to the number of attacks you can make with a Shillelagh. Spare the dying. So, one action to cast, and you choose a creature within 15 feet that has 0 hit points, and you stabilize it. Then it upgrades with level, increasing the range to 30 feet at level 5, 60 feet at level 11, and 120 feet at level 17. They also specify in the design notes that this cantrip has been added to the Druid spell list. The old version basically did the same thing, except it was a touch spell with no scaling, and it didn't work on undead or constructs. Should also be noted that this now replaces the previous version of Spare the Dying we saw in the playtest. That was still a touch spell, but it gave the target 1 hit point of healing. And good riddance! So, why the changes? Well, the change to the playtest version is probably partially due to banning the whole getting rid of the stabilized portion of dying, and instead having you just go back to 1 hit point. Speaking of things to say good riddance to, and adding it to the Druid spell list is probably just to give Druids a bit more access to healing spells. And the range is probably to juice up a weaker cantrip that was often difficult to use because you had to be in the right position. I expect the scaling is intended to test other ways to scale spells beyond just doing more damage. In my opinion, I like all of this. I didn't like the old playtest version of this spell, and I found the touch range limiting on Spare the Dying. Adding it to the Druid spell list makes sense to me, and I like the idea of testing other kinds of spell scaling. So this one gets a big thumbs up from me. I'm totally on board. And then we're going to finish up with True Strike. So you cast this cantrip as an action, and you make 1 weapon attack using your spellcasting ability modifier for the attack and damage roll. Notice this does not say that you can use your spellcasting ability modifier. It says you use it, so you will automatically use it. If the attack deals damage, you can choose to deal radiant damage instead of the weapon's normal damage type. And the spell scales, delivering an additional d6 radiant damage at level 5, 2d6 at 11, and 3d6 at 17. So there's no point going over the changes, it's an entirely new spell. The old True Strike was concentration, lasted 1 round, and gave you advantage on your first attack roll against a selected target. So why did they change it? Because True Strike is absolutely terrible, nobody liked it, and I bet its satisfaction score in the 2014 survey was brutal. So obviously they decided rather than try to fix it, just to scrap the whole thing and start over. So, my opinion. I do not blame them for the complete redesign at all. Honestly, it's probably the right move. There are some obvious similarities to Green Flame Blade and Booming Blade in how this functions, but there are also notable differences. There is no additional damage here until level 5, and the damage scaling is smaller than those spells at a d6. However, unlike either of those cantrips, this spell works with any weapon. So, you True Strike with a light crossbow at level 1, then it's doing more damage than other attack cantrips, and even at level 5, I'll take a d8 plus a d6 plus 4 over 2d10. I mean, that's 12 versus 11. So, you're getting into really high levels before other cantrips catch up. And that's only if you don't get a magical weapon. So, True Strike kind of becomes the obvious attack cantrip pick. But, at this point, I will say I am hesitantly on board overall. But I have a couple things that I think should be addressed. First off, I am concerned that this combines with Shillelagh. With both cantrips scaling damage, that just seems too good. Though I would say that Shillelagh is the problem, not True Strike. Also, I kind of think this probably shouldn't work with ranged weapons. With this completely new design, I think I'd like to see it play tested before sitting on a final opinion. But for now, I at least definitely support this new approach to the spell. But let's get a couple things ironed out and properly play tested. And those are the newly designed cantrips. Out of the 10, I'm pretty happy with the direction of 9 of them, so I'm pretty happy with the package overall. That said, if they increase the distance of light on Produce Flame, the damage on Shocking Grasp, the range on Poison Spray, and some more things, I think these could be better yet. But what do you think? Let's discuss it in the comments. Otherwise, until next time, I'm going to sit back, relax, and have some fun. D&D is for everyone. Thanks, everybody, and I'll talk to you soon. So the only thing as satisfying to me as that first sip of coffee in the morning is being able to do this full time, which is thanks to the patrons of this channel. Today I'm thanking my Archmage level patrons. These are the fresh brewed, sustainably grown, ethically sourced coffee beans of patrons. Aaron Kaler, Aiden Potter, Awesome Face, Benjamin, Brett McDowell, Dash Panthers, Dave Peters, David Lotz, David W. Skibbins, Gakumaru, Isaac Lester, James Thomas, Jonathan Lexi, K.J. Aurelio, Kevin Casey, Kurt G., Kavathe, Leonardo Gonzalez, Marlon Rooks, Migish, Rysquai, Sadkeone7, Stephen Edmondson, TUM, and the Al Gore Rhythm, new patron. Thanks, Al Gore Rhythm. I like your rhythm. An additional thank you to all my patrons. I'll talk to you all later.